"Don't get in the boat, Mr. Whitmore." The words came out of the gray morning fog like something the lake itself had whispered, and Grayson Whitmore stopped with one polished shoe already on the dock plank. His hand on the mooring post, the oar he had carried down from the boathouse balanced against his shoulder. He was 64 years old, and he had rowed this same stretch of Lake Corwin nearly every dawn for 11 springs, and in all that time no one had ever spoken to him out here. The dock was his church. The fog was his silence. And now a child was standing at the edge of the reeds with her arms wrapped around a small pink object, looking at him the way people look when they have been rehearsing a sentence all night and are afraid it will come out wrong. He knew her, or nearly. She was the cook's daughter, Teresa's girl. He had seen her crossing the lawn at odd hours with a pair of second-hand binoculars around her neck, crouching in the tall grass near the boathouse, still as a heron, waiting for whatever it was she waited for. Della, that was the name. She was maybe 9. "What did you say?" Grayson asked. "Please don't get in the boat." Her voice cracked and then steadied. "And please don't look at the man by the boathouse. Just keep talking to me like I asked you something about birds." Something in the delivery of it stopped the automatic dismissal already forming in his throat. He was a man who had spent 40 years being interrupted by people who wanted a piece of him, and he had learned to smell the difference between a person who needed something and a person who was afraid for him. This child was the second kind. He lowered the oar slowly, as if he were only adjusting his grip, and he glanced, without turning his head, toward the boathouse 40 feet up the slope. A man stood in the wide doorway, not Elliot. That was the first thing Grayson's mind reported before it understood why it mattered. The figure was the right height and wore the right olive canvas jacket that the groundskeepers all wore, and he was holding a coil of dock rope the way Elliot always held it, but he was standing wrong. He was standing straight. Elliot Barnes had shattered his left knee falling off a ladder 9 years ago and had never once stood square on both legs since. He listed, always favoring the good side, and when he waited for anything, he leaned a shoulder against the frame and let the bad leg rest. This man carried his weight evenly across both feet. This man had good knees. Grayson turned back to the girl and made himself smile, an easy weekend smile, the one he used at fundraisers. "You've seen a rare one, have you?" he said, loud enough to carry. "Show me." Della's chin trembled with relief that he had understood. She lifted the pink thing in her hands, and he saw it was a little digital voice recorder, the kind sold in drugstores, its case decorated with a peeling sticker of a cardinal. "I record the birds," she said, playing along and not playing along. "Before it gets loud. I was out at the boathouse before the sun. That's when the warblers come." Her eyes went glassy. "I was recording, and then 2 people came down to the deck to talk, and they didn't see me because I was in the blind I built. And I kept the button pressed the whole time because I didn't know what else to do." "What did you hear?" Grayson asked, very gently now, all the ease gone out of him and only the calm left. "They said your name, sir." She swallowed. "The lady said it," she said, "this morning while he rose. And she said the boat's been fixed so it won't be a boat anymore by the time he's in the middle. And she said nobody swims back from the middle in this cold. And she said after 7 months it all comes to her clean." A tear went sideways down her cheek and she wiped it with her wrist without looking away from him. The lady was Mrs. Whitmore. The man wasn't anyone I ever saw before this year. Grayson Whitmore stood on his own dock in the fog with the cold lake breathing against the pilings, and he felt the ground he had built his life on tilt very slightly. The way a floor tilts in the first quarter second of an earthquake, before the mind will let itself believe the walls could ever move. He looked once quickly at the rowboat tied at the end of the dock. It was his boat. Cedar hull, green trim, the little brass drain plug at the stern that Elliot pulled and cleaned every fall. He could not see from here whether the plug was seated. He did not need to. He understood suddenly, with the flat clarity he usually reserved for reading a balance sheet, that if he stepped down into that boat and rowed 200 yards into the deep center, where the springs kept the water near 40 degrees even in May, and the hull quietly began to fill, no one on this shore would raise an alarm. The man in the doorway would watch, and later there would be a capsized boat and a widower's estate that was no longer a widower's estate, and a story about how the old man had a bad shoulder and shouldn't have gone out alone. "Come here," Grayson said quietly. "Walk to me slow. Don't run. We're going to walk up toward the roses and around the side, like I'm showing you the beds. Can you do that?" She nodded and came, and he put a hand lightly on her small shoulder and turned her up the path, and the two of them walked away from the water at the unhurried pace of an old man giving a child a garden lesson. He did not look back at the boathouse. He talked steadily about the peonies that were about to open, about the wren that nested every year in the pump house, nonsense in a low, even tone, while his heart hammered against the inside of his ribs like a fist against a locked door. When they reached the tall arbor vitae hedge that screened the kitchen garden from the water, and he was certain no eye could reach them, he stopped and crouched down, so his face was level with hers. "What's your name?" he asked, though he was almost sure. "Della, sir. Della Vaughn. Della." He said it the way he memorized the names of the few things that had ever truly mattered. "I need to hear it. Will you let me hear it?" She held out the recorder in both hands, the way you'd hand someone something sacred. He took it as carefully as a man handles a live wire. On the little screen was a single file, 11 minutes, 26 seconds. He put it to his ear and pressed play with his thumb and dropped the volume, so only he could hear. For a moment there was only the wash of the lake and the ordinary racket of morning birds, and he understood in that instant why the child had been down there, why the universe had put a 9-year-old with a drugstore recorder in a duck blind of woven branches on the exact morning his wife had chosen to end him. Then there was the scrape of the boathouse door and 2 sets of footsteps on the boards, and then Camille's voice, and it was not the voice she used with him. It was cooler, older, businesslike. "He'll be down at 5:40. He never varies. 11 years he has never once slept in." A pause, the soft clink of a travel mug. "You loosened it enough?" A man's voice answered, lower, unhurried, the voice of someone reading from a plan he had memorized and rehearsed. "It'll take on water slow. He won't notice till he's past the point. By the time he understands, he can't row back against it, not with that shoulder. The cold does the rest inside 4 minutes. I've timed colder. I've timed colder." Grayson's jaw set. That was not the sentence of a jealous lover. That was the sentence of a professional. "And the money," the man said. "Walk me through it again." 40 million, Camille's voice, and there was something almost tender in how she said the number, the way another woman might say the name of a child. "Accidental death, double indemnity, that's what the writer does. The lawyers reviewed it last spring. There's no contest clause anymore, no waiting period, and I'm the only beneficiary. He signed it himself. He signs whatever I put a tab on. He never reads past the first page anymore. He trusts me to read for him." A short laugh, not unkind, which was somehow the worst part. That was the whole point of the last 4 years, to be the one who reads for him. Grayson stopped the recording. He did not need the rest. He stood there behind the arbor vitae, with the cold plastic warm now from his hand. And he found that his eyes had closed on their own. And behind them, he was not seeing the woman who had planned his drowning. He was seeing a woman in a blue dress on a hotel balcony in Savannah 12 years ago, laughing at something he'd said, pressing her forehead to his shoulder, telling him she had waited her whole life to feel safe with someone. He had believed her. He had been so grateful after Beatrice died, so ashamed of how grateful he was that a person could look at a tired widower with a fortune and see anything worth loving. He understood now that she had seen exactly one thing worth loving, and it was the number, and she had been reading the fine print of him from the first night. He opened his eyes. Della was watching him, and her small face had gone very still, the way a child's face goes when they have handed a grown-up something terrible and are waiting to learn whether they did right or wrong. "You did the bravest thing I have ever seen a person do," Grayson told her, and he meant it more than he had meant anything in years. "Whatever happens today, you remember that. You saved a man's life this morning. Nothing that comes after changes that." "Is Mrs. Whitmore going to be in trouble?" Della whispered. "Yes," he said, because he would not lie to her, not after what she had done. "But not from you. She's in trouble because of what she chose, not because of what you heard. You only refused to look away. That's a different thing entirely." He tucked the recorder into the breast pocket of his rowing jacket, over his heart. "Now I need you to do something and do it exactly. Go inside to your mother. Tell her your stomach hurts and you're going to lie down. Don't tell her one word of this, not because she'd do anything wrong, but because the fewer people who know, the fewer people are in danger. Stay in your room. If anybody asks where I am, you haven't seen me since yesterday. Can you carry that?" She thought about it, seriously, the way she seemed to do everything. "Yes," she said, and went. Grayson took his phone out of his jacket and, standing in the wet grass behind the hedge, he called the one number he called when the ground moved. Warren Kessler had been his attorney for 22 years and answered on the second ring. "Grayson, you don't call at 6 a.m. unless something's on fire." "Warren." His voice came out level, boardroom level, the voice he used to report a loss without letting the room see him bleed. "I need you to do 3 things, and I need you to do them without telling a single soul at the firm. Not Simone at reception, not my own office, no one." He paused only long enough to breathe. "First, pull my life insurance policy and every amendment made to it in the last 4 years, every signature, every rider. I want the notary's name. Second, I need a car sent to the county road below my east gate, an unmarked one in 20 minutes. Third, I need you to find out whether there is a man living somewhere in my wife's life named." He had not caught the name on the recording. He would have to trust his memory of the voice. A man in his early 40s, well-groomed, calls himself something ordinary. I'll get you the name within the hour. There was a silence on the line that Grayson had heard exactly twice in 22 years. Once during the takeover fight in the 90s, and once the night Beatrice's doctor called. "Where are you right now?" Warren said. Not a question. "Behind my own hedge, hiding from my own boathouse. Do not get in a boat. Do not get in a car with anyone you don't trust with your life. Say nothing to Camille that isn't ordinary. I'll have a car at the East Gate in 15 minutes and I'll have the policy before you're in it." A pause. "Grayson, is it what I think? It's worse than what you think," Grayson said. 15 minutes. He hung up and stood a moment longer, listening to the house wake behind him, the far clatter of a pan, a faucet running, the ordinary sounds of a life that had ended sometime in the night while he slept upstairs and did not know it. Then he did the hardest thing he had done so far. He decided he needed to see her, not the recording of her with his own eyes before he let a single wheel turn. Because Warren was right about everything, except the one thing Warren could not know, which was that some small, animal part of Grayson's heart was still hoping the child had misheard, still hoping there was a version of this morning where the woman he had married was only a woman making tea. He walked around to the front of the house, through the side door by the mudroom, and he climbed the back stairs to change out of his rowing clothes as if this were any Tuesday. He passed the long mirror on the landing and did not recognize the calm man in it. Downstairs, in the breakfast room, Camille was already at the table in a pale robe, her dark hair loose, a cup of coffee at her elbow, and her phone face down beside it. When she heard him on the stairs, she looked up and her whole face rearranged itself into warmth, instantly, effortlessly, the way water finds its level. "You're back early," she said. "It's foggy out there. I worried you'd catch a chill on the water." She reached a hand toward him across the table, palm up, an invitation. Grayson looked at the hand. He looked at the wedding ring he had put on it in a garden in Savannah, and at the small silver watch he had given her on their 10th anniversary, and at her upturned face with its practiced tenderness, and beneath all of it, for the first time in 12 years, he saw the thing that had always been there and that he had trained himself not to see. The cool assessing patience of a person checking whether a problem had resolved itself on schedule. "I didn't feel like the cold this morning," he said, and he made himself take the offered hand and press it briefly and let it go. Her skin was warm. Her perfume was the one she had worn for 9 years, the one he bought her 3 bottles of at a time. "I think I'll work from the study today. I've got the Hollow Creek closing to prep for Thursday." "Of course, darling." She smiled and picked her phone back up, and he watched her thumb move across it, and he knew, with the certainty of a man who had just heard her voice on a recording pricing his death, that she was texting the man in the boathouse doorway that the fish had not swum into the net. "I love you," Camille said, not looking up. He could not answer that. He simply nodded, and turned and went down the hall toward his study, and only when he was inside with the door shut did he let himself lean against it and breathe. He gave it 4 minutes. He opened a drawer and closed it. He walked to the window and looked out at nothing. He was building a small, honest record of himself, doing exactly what he had said he'd do. Then he slipped out through the study's garden door, crossed the wet lawn, along the tree line, where the boathouse could not see him, and walked out the small pedestrian gate on the east side onto the county road, where a plain gray sedan was idling against the shoulder with its engine running. The window came down. Behind the wheel sat Elliot Barnes, listing slightly to the right the way he always did, one hand resting easy on the top of the wheel, the other in his lap. His weathered face was carefully blank, but his eyes moved over Grayson once, top to bottom, the way you check a man for wounds. "Mr. Kessler called me an hour ago," Elliot said. "Told me not to come in through the main gate today. Told me to sit here and keep the motor running and not ask questions until you got in." He reached across and pushed the passenger door open. "So I'm not asking. But I'll tell you, sir. There's a fella been living in my boathouse quarters for 2 weeks who I never hired. And Mrs. Whitmore said he was helping me with the spring work. And I said I don't need help, and she said keep it to yourself. So I got some questions saving up." Grayson got in the front seat and shut the door. "Drive, Elliot. Not toward town. Just drive." And as the estate slid away behind the stone wall, he told his caretaker of 18 years the whole of it, in a low, flat voice, from the child in the reeds to the number on the recording, and Elliot Barnes drove with his jaw tightening notch by notch and did not say a word until Grayson had finished. "40 million, Elliot said finally, and shook his head slowly. "That woman priced you like a job lot." "She priced me like a closing," Grayson said. "She always did read faster than me." There was a diner off the state route, with a gravel lot and a broken neon sign. The kind of place that took cash and didn't remember faces. And Warren Kessler was already there when they arrived. In the corner booth by the back exit, in the same plain dark suit he wore, whether the matter was worth $10 or 10 million. He had a leather folder in front of him and 2 cups of coffee going cold, and he stood when Grayson came in and gripped his hand hard. "Sit," Warren said. Elliot took the counter stool nearest the door, his back to the room, watching the lot. Warren waited until Grayson was settled, then opened the folder and laid 3 pages on the chipped formica. "Your policy," he said, tapping the first. "Original coverage 9 years old, 4 million, standard for a man your age when Beatrice was still alive. Beneficiary was Beatrice, then your foundation after she passed. Routine, I was in the room." His finger moved to the second page. "First Amendment 3 years ago. Coverage raised to 12 million. Beneficiary changed to Camille. You told me you wanted to take care of her. I drew it. I remember it." Then the third page, and his voice dropped a register. "Second Amendment. 14 months ago. Coverage raised to 40 million. An accidental death rider added, doubles the payout under the right circumstances, which a drowning while boating alone would very much be. Every conditional clause stripped out. No contest provision, no exclusion window. Camille, sole beneficiary, clean." He slid the page an inch toward Grayson. "That's your signature at the bottom. I did not draw this document. I never saw it until 3 hours ago." Grayson looked at the page. He knew the little upstroke he always put on the W of his last name, the way his hand had made that same shape 10,000 times on contracts and checks and Christmas cards. It was there. He had no memory of writing it. "That's mine," he said, "but I never signed that." "I believe you," Warren said. "It was witnessed by a notary named Colby Grange, out of a little shop in Torrington. I called the office at 6:15. He retired 4 months ago and moved to Florida. His forwarding number's been disconnected." He folded his hands. 14 months ago, Grayson, where were you?" 14 months ago, I was in Denver for the whole first week of April, the Front Range deal." Grayson's mouth was dry. "Camille stayed home. She said she had the Torrington Hospital gala." He stared at his own false signature. "She was in Torrington. I was 2,000 miles away." The two men looked at each other over the cold coffee, while the diner hummed its indifferent morning around them. A fork scraping a plate, a trucker laughing at the counter, the cook calling an order. Warren closed the folder. "There's the other matter," he said. "The man. I put Simone Vega on it the second we hung up. She's the investigator I've used 15 years. She's quiet and she's fast. You said you'd have a name. I don't have a name he uses. I have his voice, and I have the last 2 weeks of him living in my boathouse." Grayson took out Della's recorder and set it on the table between them like a small pink relic. "It's all on here." Camille says his part of the plan. He says his. "Warren, listen to me. The way he talks. He wasn't nervous," he said. "I've timed colder. That is not a boyfriend who got carried away. That's a man who has done this before." Warren picked up the recorder, held it a moment, then took out his phone and made a call. He read off a description in a low voice. "Mal, 40s, well kept, living on the Whitmore property under a groundskeeper cover, connected to Camille Whitmore, likely operating under an alias," and hung up. "Simone will start with the property. Utility hookups, deliveries, any vehicle that's come through the gate the last 2 weeks. If he had to give a name to anyone, she'll find it." He set the recorder down gently. "Now the real question, Grayson. What do you want to do? Because you have 2 roads and only 2. Tell me both. Road 1. Warren spread his hands. "We drive to the state police right now. We have the recording, the forged policy, the child witness, the caretaker who never hired the man. That's enough to open a case today. They arrest him. They question her. She hires a lawyer. It grinds along for a year, and probably it ends where it should end. Probably. And Road 2. Road 2 is harder, and it costs you something." Warren looked at him steadily. "We let them believe it can still work. We give this man enough rope and enough time to reach for the plan again. And we watch, and we listen, and we catch him not on what he said, but on what he does. We close every door before he can slip through one. Because a man who has done this before, Grayson, and if Simone confirms what your gut is telling you, he has. That kind of man has walked away clean before. Road 1 might convict him. Road 2 makes sure he can never do it to anyone again." Grayson turned the recorder slowly on the tabletop with one finger. He thought of the drain plug in the cedar hull. He thought of "I've timed colder." "How many times before do you think?" he said. "I don't know yet." Warren's voice was quiet. "But men like that don't start at 40 million. Grayson looked out the smeared diner window at the ordinary road, where a school bus was slowing at a corner, and a woman was watering the flowers in a window box, and none of it knew that an old man had almost gone into the cold that morning and "Then Road 2, he said. "I want to know who else he's done this to, and I don't want him to walk away one more time." If a story like this is holding you right now, take a moment and tap the like button and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Because stories about ordinary courage only find the people who need them when you share them. Subscribe to Pure Silent Stories so the next one finds its way to you too. Simone Vega called back at 3 that afternoon, into a phone Warren had set up under a name that touched none of Grayson's accounts. Grayson was in a plain room on the 4th floor of a business hotel. By then a room the color of weak tea, with a framed print of a covered bridge over the desk and a window looking at a parking lot. He sat on the edge of the bed and put the call on speaker, and Warren sat in the room's one chair, and Simone's voice came through low and precise. "I'll keep it tight. We don't have a lot of runway," she said. "The man in your boathouse is going by Sebastian Marsh. That's the name on a lease he co-signed for a storage unit in Wexley 6 weeks ago, and on a temporary contractor's badge, someone in your household requested for him. Sebastian Marsh has a clean, thin paper trail going back exactly 4 years and nothing before it. That's the tell. Real people have messy, long histories. This is a coat somebody put on." A pause, papers moving. "His name is Curtis Alderman, born in Ohio, 1981. Legally changed his name the first time in 2009 after his first wife died." Grayson closed his eyes. Her name was Eleanor Pratt, 51. They'd been married 18 months. She fell down an interior stairway in their home in 2008, ruled accidental. He was the sole beneficiary of a policy worth $2.2 million. Simone read it flat, the way you read facts you have already grieved through. In 2015, there was a fiancée in Sacramento, a widow with money, who broke it off 4 months before the wedding and filed a protective order 3 weeks later. She wouldn't say why on the record. He left California inside a month, and in 2019 he married a woman named Rosalind Kerr in Scottsdale, 56, no children, considerable estate. They were married a little over 2 years. She died in 2021. Carbon monoxide, faulty heater in her own home. He was out of town. The fire marshal ruled it accidental. The payout was $4.6 million. She let that sit. And now he's Sebastian Marsh in a millionaire's boathouse with a $40 million policy and a cold lake and a boat with a loose plug. No one spoke. The parking lot below the window held a delivery van and a woman loading grocery bags into a hatchback, the whole ordinary machinery of a world going about its day. "Simone," Grayson said finally, "does my wife know any of this, about the others?" The pause on the line was careful. "I can't tell you that for certain," Simone said, "but the way this man builds a name, the way he scatters records across states. Alderman doesn't leave that kind of trail lying around for a partner to find. If I had to bet, I'd say she thinks she found a clever, patient man who agreed to help her get free and rich. I don't think she knows she's the fourth. She's also a participant," Grayson said quietly. "Both things can be true. She priced me. She forged my hand on a document." He rubbed his face with both palms, and the cold, controlled thing that had held him upright since dawn cracked along one seam, just slightly, the way a dam shows its first thread of water. "But no, she doesn't know she was standing next to the same cliff 2 women fell off of. That," Warren said, "is exactly what we use." Over the next 9 days, Grayson Whitmore did the strangest and most disciplined work of his life, which was to walk through his own house as though nothing had changed. He came home the same evening, and Camille met him at the door with worry so convincing that he understood at last how deep her craft ran. He told her the boat had taken on water 200 yards out that morning, and that he'd made it back only because the wind had carried him. And he'd been so rattled, he'd gone to Warren's to sort out whether the boat's insurance covered it. And could you believe old Elliot swore he'd checked the plug in the fall? He watched her absorb this, watched her understand that he believed it was an accident, that he suspected the equipment and not the marriage, and he watched relief move behind her eyes like a fish under ice. She held him and told him to never go out on that lake alone again. He promised he wouldn't. He let Sebastian Marsh stay. That was the hardest part, knowing the man was sleeping 100 yards from Della and her mother. But Simone had 2 of her people on the property now, posing as arborists, parked where they could see the staff cottage day and night. And Grayson had quietly moved Teresa and Della into a guest suite in the main house under the story of a plumbing repair in the staff residence. So the 2 of them slept behind a door he could stand in front of if it came to that. Della kept her promise. She said nothing. She went to school and she watched her birds, and once passing him in the upstairs hall, she looked up and he winked at her, and she almost smiled. And that almost smile did more to hold him together than any of Warren's plans. Simone recovered the forged closing packet from the notary's abandoned files through a colleague of Grange's who'd inherited the practice. The signature was Grayson's, traced with real skill over a lightbox from a genuine document. The ink and the paper stock dated to the week Camille had been in Torrington. It would not survive an expert's eye. Warren built the file page by page, the 2 dead wives, the vanished notary, the storage unit in Wexley where Simone's people photographed, through a gap in the door, a duffel containing 3 driver's licenses in 3 names and a boat drain plug wrapped in a rag. The recording anchored all of it. Della's cheap pink recorder, its cardinal sticker peeling, became the spine of a case against a man who had beaten 2 rulings and 1 broken engagement across a decade. On the 10th morning they moved. Simone's read of Marsh's habits said he ran the lake road every dawn now, restless, waiting for a plan that had stalled, and that on Thursdays he drove to the Wexley storage unit. The state police, briefed for 3 days by then by a detective named Paula Ramsey, who had listened to the recording twice, with her hand pressed flat over her mouth, were waiting on the county road below the unit when Curtis Alderman arrived to move his duffel. He never reached the door. They took him in the gravel lot with his own 3 names in his own trunk. Grayson was not there. He had asked to be somewhere else, and where he chose to be was the breakfast room of his own house, sitting across from his wife, with Detective Ramsey and 2 uniformed officers already parked out of sight beyond the front hedge, and Warren Kessler standing in the hall doorway with his hands folded. Camille was buttering a piece of toast when her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, and Grayson watched the exact moment the message reached her, watched her go, in the space of a single breath, from a woman planning her free and wealthy summer to a woman who had just learned the machine had jammed with her hand inside it. She set the toast down very carefully. She looked up at him, and for one instant the warmth she wore was simply not there, and he saw the actual person underneath, calculating, already reaching for the next lie, and then, seeing his face, understanding that there was no next lie. "Grayson," she said. "I heard it, Camille," he said. His voice did not rise. That was the thing he was proudest of, afterward, that it never rose. "I heard all of it. The morning I didn't get in the boat. A child recorded you on the boathouse deck. I've had it for 10 days. He watched the color leave her. "And the man you've been building your summer with has a different name, and 2 dead wives, and I don't believe you knew that part. I believe you thought you'd found a clever partner. I want you to understand, before they come in, that you weren't clever. You were the 4th. Her lips parted. Nothing came. "I loved you," he said, and this was the only place his voice thinned on the past tense of the verb. "I was so grateful to be loved after Beatrice that I let you read the fine print of my whole life to me. And you read it. You read every line. You just weren't reading it for me." Detective Ramsey came in from the hall then, quiet and unhurried, and read Camille Whitmore her rights in a level, almost gentle voice, and Camille stood when she was asked to, and put her hands behind her back before anyone told her to, and did not cry. As they walked her out through the front foyer, past the long mirror where she had adjusted her earrings 1,000 mornings, she stopped for the briefest second beside Grayson. She did not speak. She only looked at him. And in that look he saw, for one strange final moment, the woman on the balcony in Savannah, laughing, pressing her forehead to his shoulder. Then she walked on, and the officers helped her into the car, and the car went down the drive and through the stone gate and out onto the road that ran along the lake. The case moved faster than anyone predicted. Curtis Alderman was charged inside 48 hours with conspiracy, attempted murder, insurance fraud, and identity fraud. The old files in Ohio and Arizona were pulled from their shelves and reopened, and investigators in both states found, with the thread Simone had handed them, that accidental had been the wrong word twice before. The dead wives finally had someone speaking their names in a courtroom. Camille was charged as a co-conspirator. Her attorney told the court she wished to enter a plea, and the judge accepted it. Grayson attended the first hearing and no others. Some things, he had decided, a man did not need to watch twice to understand. The house changed after that. Not the way a house changes after a death, but the way one changes after a long fever finally breaks, and the windows are opened for the first time in years. Grayson moved his bedroom to a smaller room on the east side, where the morning sun came in clean off the lake. He sold the cars he never drove and the boat he would never row again. He gave Elliot Barnes a lifetime position and a pension that made the old caretaker argue with him for half an hour before he'd take it, and he had the boathouse quarters gutted and rebuilt as a proper workshop for the man who'd earned it, Teresa Vaughn. He asked to stay on as household manager, at nearly double, and she took 3 days to decide and then said yes, and moved with her daughter into the largest cottage on the property, the one with the stone fireplace and the sunroom that faced the water, and Della kept her birds. Grayson bought her a real pair of binoculars and a field guide as thick as a Bible, and paid her school tuition and the tuition after that, and set aside enough for whatever came after that too. He did not call it a gift. He called it an investment in someone who had already shown him what kind of person she was going to be. In the fall, almost 6 months after the morning in the fog, Grayson walked down to the lake one clear Saturday and found her sitting on the low stone wall by the boathouse with a sketchbook open on her knees, drawing a heron that stood one-legged in the shallows near the reeds. He sat down beside her, careful of his shoulder, and for a while they watched the bird together without speaking. "You still draw," he said. "My dad drew," Della told him, not looking up from the page. "My mom said he drew on everything. Napkins, receipts, the backs of envelopes. She said he'd have drawn on the walls if she let him." Her pencil moved. "I never got to meet him, but she says I got it from him." Grayson had not known this. He nodded slowly. "Then you came by it honest," he said. They sat in the quiet a while longer, the wind moving through the cattails, the heron holding its patient pose. "Mr. Whitmore," Della said finally, still watching the water, "do you ever still feel scared about that morning?" He thought about the question a long time because the child who had asked it deserved a real answer and not a comfortable one. "Sometimes," he said at last. "Not the way I felt it then, but sometimes I wake in the dark and I hear the fog on the lake, and I think about how close I came to putting my foot in that boat and rowing off without ever stopping to hear you. And what I feel then isn't exactly fear. It's more like gratitude that hasn't figured out yet how to hold still." Della nodded slowly. The way she did everything, as though she were filing the answer somewhere it would keep. "My mom says doing the right thing doesn't always make your life easier," she said. "But she says it lets you look in the mirror without having to look away." Grayson looked out across the bright water toward the far shore, where the springs kept the deep places cold, and he thought about how a 9-year-old with a peeling cardinal sticker on a drugstore recorder had refused, on one ordinary morning, to look away from a thing she knew was wrong. "Your mother," he said, "is right about almost everything. The most dangerous threats in a life rarely arrive as strangers at the gate. They wear familiar faces and share our tables and learn our habits and read the fine print of us while we look somewhere else. And courage, when it comes, seldom comes wearing size or wealth or standing. Sometimes it comes crouched in a blind of woven branches, 9 years old, holding its breath, keeping one finger pressed on a button because it can't think what else to do. Pay attention to the small things. Never look away from what you know is wrong, and never, ever underestimate the difference one brave voice can make."